There's a particular kind of silence that only exists in the seconds after something irreversible happens. Not the silence of empty rooms or quiet mornings. A hell-breath silence. The kind that presses against your eardrums and makes the air feel thick, like the world itself is waiting to see what comes next. That silence happened in a military mess hall on a Tuesday. It started with a shove. Her name was Maya Reeves, 24 years old, 5'4" on a generous day, with the kind of posture that comes from spending years trying to take up less space in rooms that never quite felt like hers. She had dark brown eyes that moved fast, cataloging exits, reading body language, counting people, a habit she had picked up so gradually over the years that she no longer noticed she was doing it. It was just how she saw the world. Tactical, quiet, always ready for the thing that might go wrong. Maya was a civilian contractor working on the base. Nutrition logistics. Officially, she managed the supply chains that kept the mess hall running, tracked inventory, filed the kind of paperwork that made the kitchen function without anyone noticing it was functioning. She had been doing this job for 14 months. She knew the rhythm of the base the way you know the rhythm of a house you've lived in long enough. Which hallways filled up when, which tables the senior officers preferred, what time the lunch rush thinned out to something almost manageable. She liked the job. That matters. She was not someone who drifted. She had chosen this work deliberately, had studied supply chain management for 3 years at a state school she paid for herself, had applied for the contractor position 6 times before they called her back. She was precise and capable, and she did not need anyone to tell her she belonged there, because she had long ago stopped waiting for that kind of permission. But belonging and being treated like you belong are two entirely different things. She had learned that distinction early. Learned it in classrooms where teachers called on the boy next to her when her hand was already raised. Learned it in the first job she ever had at 17, stocking shelves at a grocery store, when a manager followed her to the break room to make sure she wasn't stealing. Learned it in 100 small moments that individually meant nothing and together meant everything. The base was not the worst place she had worked. Most of the Marines she interacted with were professional. Some were even kind, the kind that came from genuine respect, rather than the performative kind that is really just condescension wearing a nicer shirt. She had her routines. She had colleagues she trusted. She was, by any measurable standard, doing fine, which is why Tuesday started like every other day. The mess hall at 1,100 hours was controlled chaos. That was the only honest way to describe it. Over 400 personnel cycling through in staggered shifts, trays clattering, conversation loud enough that you had to lean in to hear anything, the smell of industrial quantity food, coffee, something fried, something that was theoretically vegetables, hanging in the air like a fog that never quite cleared. Maya moved through it the way she always did, clipboard in hand, eyes moving, mentally cross-referencing what she was seeing against what the morning inventory had told her to expect. The serving line was running low on the protein option on the far left. She needed to flag that before the next wave came through. The coffee urns on the east wall needed to be rotated. She could tell by the way the line was backing up unevenly that one of them had been tagged out of service, and no one had repositioned the remaining ones to compensate. She was making a note about the coffee urns when it happened. She was moving between 2 long tables, clipboard raised, head down, focused on her own handwriting, when something hit her from behind hard enough to send her stumbling forward 2 full steps. Her clipboard went one direction. Her pen went another. The stack of intake forms she'd been carrying under her left arm fanned out across the floor like a hand of cards thrown in frustration. She caught herself on the edge of table. Steadied. Turned around. He was big. That was the first thing that registered. Not a judgment, just a fact her brain filed automatically. 6'2", at minimum, broad through the shoulders in the way that comes from years of structured physical training rather than nature alone. His uniform was clean and pressed, the kind of precise that signals either genuine pride or the desire to project it. He was mid-conversation with another Marine, gesturing with his tray, and he had not stopped moving. He had walked directly into her, or possibly through her. The physics of it suggesting that from his perspective, she had simply not existed in the space he was occupying. He glanced back over his shoulder, not to apologize, not to check if she was all right. The glance was the kind you give a piece of furniture that got in your way, a brief, irritated acknowledgement that something had inconvenienced you. "Watch where you're going," he said, and Then, with the certainty of someone who has never once questioned whether a room belonged to them, he added, "You shouldn't even be in here right now. This is lunch rush. Leave now." He said it without breaking stride, without raising his voice, without the theater of anger, which somehow made it worse, because it wasn't anger. It was dismissal, the kind that doesn't need to raise its voice because it has never encountered a reason to. His name, Maya would later learn, was Staff Sergeant Daniel Colt. 8 years in the Marine Corps, 2 combat deployments, a record that, by any objective measure, represented real service and real sacrifice. He was not, by the accounts of people who knew him, a cruel man. He was not someone who woke up thinking about how to diminish people. He was someone who had simply never been asked to think about it all. The mess hall did not go completely quiet. It was too loud for that. But there was a localized hush. The tables nearest to where Maya was standing, the people close enough to have heard clearly, a ripple of held breath and averted eyes. Maya stood there for exactly 3 seconds. She knew because she counted. It was something she did in moments like this, the cognitive equivalent of grounding herself, using numbers as a handhold against the thing that was rising in her chest. 1, 2, 3. Then she crouched down and started picking up her papers. She moved methodically, 4 by form. Her handwriting was still legible on most of them. The floor was clean, at least they ran a tight kitchen, and she res-tacked them in order, intake dates aligned, the way she always kept them. Her hands were steady. She was extremely focused on keeping her hands steady. The people at the nearest table were not looking at her. They were looking at their trays, or at each other, or at the middle distance that people stare into when they've witnessed something they don't know how to respond to, and have decided that not responding is the safest option. She understood that. She did not hold it against them. What she held against the moment was more specific and harder to name. It was not the shove, physical contact in a crowded room. Accidents happen. She was not precious about that. It was not even the words, exactly, though the words were the thing that would replay in her head later at 2 a.m. with the particular clarity that 2 a.m. specializes in. It was the architecture of the assumption, the certainty, the way he had looked at her and seen someone who should not be there, who needed to be told to leave, without a single moment of curiosity about who she was or what she was doing. She had managed the food supply for his entire unit for 14 months. She retrieved her pen from under the table, clicked it once, wrote the note about the coffee urns. She was very good at her job. She would continue being very good at her job. And she would not give anyone the satisfaction of watching her be anything other than composed, because she had learned, again, the hard way, that falling apart in public only ever becomes the story. The story she intended to tell, she would tell later, through proper channels, with documentation and dates, and the kind of precision that could not be dismissed. She stood up, gathered her clipboard, and walked toward the kitchen. Staff Sergeant Daniel Colt ate his lunch at a corner table with 2 other Marines, Corporal James Wyatt and Sergeant First Class Leon Abreu, both of whom had been present for what happened, both of whom said nothing about it while they ate. That was normal. That was the culture. You did not relitigate small moments over food unless the small moment was funny, and this one was not particularly funny. Colt was in the middle of a conversation about a training schedule change that affected all 3 of them, and that conversation was more immediately relevant to their lives than the woman with the clipboard who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. He finished his food. He cleared his tray. He went back to work. He thought about it for approximately 30 seconds after it happened, and then he did not think about it again. Maya, in the kitchen, was thinking about it differently. She had a colleague there, a woman named Terry, who had worked the base kitchen for 11 years and who possessed, as a result, the specific kind of institutional memory that makes a person genuinely dangerous in the best possible way. Terry knew every process, every workaround, every chain of command, and every grievance procedure. She also knew, after 11 years, which grievances went somewhere and which ones disappeared into a folder somewhere and were never open again. "You okay?" Terry asked. "I'm fine," Maya said. Terry looked at her for a long moment. She had a face built for reading people, all the softness of someone who has chosen patience as a survival strategy rather than a personality trait. She had seen Maya compose before. She had also seen Maya composed in a particular way that means something happened, and the composure is doing a lot of work. He shoved you. He walked into me. Didn't stop. Told me to leave. Terry made a sound that was not quite a word, but communicated a full paragraph. You know who he is? Not yet. I can find out. I know, Maya said. I'll find out myself. Terry nodded. She handed Maya a cup of coffee. Actual good coffee, the staff room kind, not the earned coffee from the hall. And they stood together for a moment in the kitchen that smelled like food and industrial cleaner and the specific exhaustion of people who do essential work that other people rarely think about. You going to file something? Terry asked. Maya turned the coffee cup in her hands. She had to tell. She didn't know she had it, but Terry did, where she aligned her grip symmetrically when she was deciding something. I'm going to find out exactly who he is first, Maya said. I'm going to document what happened. And then I'm going to make a decision about what to do with that documentation. That's a politician's answer. It's a careful answer. Same thing, sometimes. Maya almost smiled. Not quite. I've been here 14 months, she said. I know how things work here. I know what gets taken seriously and what gets filed under misunderstanding and handed back to me in a sealed envelope 6 weeks later. So what's different this time? Maya set the coffee down. She picked up her clipboard. There were witnesses, she said. A lot of them. The base had a formal process for civilian contractor complaints. It was not a fast process. It was not a process designed with the complainant's comfort in mind. It was designed, like most institutional processes, to protect the institution first and the individual second. Maya knew this. She had read the contractor handbook twice when she first started, once for information and once to understand the gap between what the handbook promised and what the institution actually delivered. She was going to use the process anyway, because the process, used correctly, created a paper trail. And a paper trail, at minimum, meant that whatever happened next would be recorded, would exist somewhere beyond the fallible and selective memories of everyone present. She started that afternoon. Not dramatically. No raised voices, no marching into offices. She sent an email to her direct supervisor, a civilian named Mark Halstead, describing the incident with the specificity of someone who had been trained in documentation. Time, location, physical description, exact words quoted, names of individuals nearby who might have witnessed the interaction, listed without commentary. She kept her language neutral. She did not use the word hostile. She did not characterize intent. She described behavior, documented fact. She had learned, from watching other people's complaints dissolve into debates about feelings versus facts, that the cleanest documentation was behavioral. This happened, at this time, in this place, these words were said. She sent the email at 2:47 p.m. She went home at 1800 and ate dinner and watched 2 episodes of a documentary about ocean migration patterns because she found large-scale animal navigation genuinely soothing, which she recognized was a specific personality trait, and owned it entirely. She did not sleep well. She lay in the dark and replayed the moment. Not the shove, but the look, the over-the-shoulder glance, the way his eyes had passed across her like she was furniture. She thought, he does not know what he started. Not in the sense of threat or revenge. In the sense of clarity. There's a specific thing that happens to people who have spent years navigating dismissal. A threshold moment when the thing that was bearable becomes the thing that no longer will be. When the cost-benefit calculation that has been quietly running in the background finally tips. This was that moment for Maya. She didn't know yet what it would mean for Daniel Colt. She would find out. Staff Sergeant Daniel Colt's Tuesday evening was unremarkable. He went to the gym. He called his mother, who lived in Pensacola, and who asked whether he was eating enough in the particular way that mothers of a certain generation ask it. Not really a question, more a ritual of care. He told her he was eating fine. He ate at a base mess hall every day. The eating was essentially professionally managed. He read for an hour before lights out. Military history. He preferred it to fiction, found it more useful. He had opinions about the Battle of Chosin Reservoir that he could discuss at length with anyone who made the mistake of expressing mild interest. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had walked into someone and told her to leave and genuinely not thought about it since. This was not because he was callous. It was because the moment had not registered to him as significant. He had processed it in the same mental category as any minor friction in a busy day, a tray that was stacked wrong, a door that stuck, something briefly inconvenient that required minimal response, and then concluded. He had not processed Maya as a person with a job and a purpose and 14 months of institutional knowledge about his unit's food supply. He had processed her as an obstacle and addressed the obstacle. He went to sleep without incident. In the morning, everything would begin to change. The email Maya had sent to Mark Halstead did not stay with Mark Halstead. This was partly procedure and partly the particular character of Mark Halstead, who was a man constitutionally unsuited to sitting on a documented complaint. Not because he was righteous, he was bureaucratically motivated rather than morally motivated, but because a documented complaint in his inbox represented a liability, and he had been in his position long enough to know that liabilities compound when you ignore them, and sometimes shrink when you move them upward quickly. He forwarded the email to his supervisor. His supervisor forwarded it to the base's Civilian Military Liaison Office. The liaison office, whose job was precisely this kind of interface, sent a notice to the chain of command above Staff Sergeant Daniel Colt. This all happened within 18 hours of Maya pressing send. The military is famously slow about many things. It is not always slow about paperwork. Paperwork moves with its own momentum, through its own channels, at a speed that has nothing to do with the urgency or importance of the underlying event and everything to do with institutional habit. Colt's company commander, Captain Reese Mayhew, received the notice on Wednesday morning. He read it twice. He called his first sergeant, and the particular silence that precedes something irreversible, the held breath kind, the pressing kind, began to gather around Staff Sergeant Daniel Colt, who was at that exact moment doing a perfectly ordinary set of pull-ups in the base gym and thinking about absolutely nothing except the count. 32. 33. He had no idea. Captain Reese Mayhew had a particular expression he used when something inconvenient arrived on his desk. Not anger, not surprise, a slight compression around his eyes, the look of a man recalibrating, rapidly, the shape of a day he had already planned. He used that expression while reading Maya's complaint for the second time. It was a clean document. That was the first thing he noticed because most complaints that came through were messy, emotionally tangled, imprecise, full of language that made them easy to dispute on technical grounds. This one is not that. Time, location, behavior, witnesses. Each element laid out in sequence, stripped of interpretation, the way a good lawyer structures an opening statement before the other side knows they're in a trial. Whoever wrote this, Mayhew thought, had written complaints before, or had written enough documentation in her professional life to understand how institutions read evidence. He set the paper down. He looked at the wall for a moment. Then he picked up the phone and called First Sergeant Carlos Vega, who answered on the second ring, because Vega always answered on the second ring, which was one of the things that made him excellent at his job. "I need Colt in my office," Mayhew said. "This morning, before 1,000. A pause. Not long. 2 seconds. Maybe the particular pause of someone who has just heard a name in a context that tells them, without any further detail, that something has gone sideways. "Yes, sir," Vega said. At 0930, Staff Sergeant Daniel Colt walked into Captain Mayhew's office with a posture of someone who has been summoned but has no particular theory about why. He had been in command offices before. He had been dressed down before, praised before, debriefed and briefed, and handed assignments in this exact configuration of institutional space. Commanding officer seated, subordinate standing, the geometry of rank doing its quiet work. He was not nervous. He was attentive, which was different. "Close the door," Mayhew said. Colt closed it. Mayhew slid the printed copy of Maya's email across the desk without preamble. Colt read it standing. His eyes moved through it once, quickly. Then he read it again. His face changed in a way that was subtle enough that someone who didn't know how to watch faces would have missed it entirely. The set of his jaw shifted. Something around his eyes went quiet in a way that is different from composure. Composure is a thing you put on. This was a thing going off. He set the paper back on the desk. "Sir," he said, "I don't remember this the way it's described here." "How do you remember it?" "Crowded hall. I bumped into someone. I may have told her to move." "I didn't," he stopped. Started again. "I didn't intentionally shove anyone." "The complaint doesn't say intentional," Mayhew said. "It says you made physical contact, did not stop, and told her to leave. Do you dispute any of those 3 facts specifically?" Silence. The question was precise. That was intentional. Mayhew was not trying to trap him. He was trying to force exactness, because exactness was the only way this conversation could go anywhere useful. Vague denial would be useless. Vague confirmation would be worse. No, sir, Colt said. I don't dispute the basic sequence. Do you know who she is? A longer pause this time. No, sir. Mayhew turned his chair slightly. Outside the window, the base was doing what bases do. Organized movement, machinery sounds, the low continuous hum of a place that does not stop for anyone's uncomfortable conversations. Her name is Maya Reeves, Mayhew said. She's a civilian contractor. Nutrition logistics. She has been managing supply chains for this base, for this unit specifically, for 14 months. He let that land. She files inventory reports that I receive every Monday morning, which means I've been reading this woman's work every week for over a year. Colt said nothing. The coffee urns in the mess hall, Mayhew continued. The ones that got repositioned last fall, when we had that service rotation problem. You remember when suddenly, that wasn't an issue anymore. Colt blinked. Vaguely, sir. That was her. The protein shortage that never happened over winter, when 2 of our suppliers had delivery delays. Her. She found alternates in 72 hours. He was not reading from a list. He knew this because he had, in fact, noticed when things stopped going wrong in the way they used to go wrong. He had just never connected a name to the reason. She has been doing invisible work that directly affects your unit's operational capacity for 14 months, Mayhew said. And yesterday you told her to leave her room. She has more professional reason to be in than most of the people eating there. The silence in the room was a different kind now. Not the institutional silence of command structure. Something more specific and harder to sit in. Sir, Colt said, and then stopped. He was not a man who filled gaps with words. He waited until he had the right ones. I didn't know who she was. I know you didn't. He stopped again. That's the problem, Sergeant. That's actually the problem. Mayhew picked up the email, looked at it once more, set it back down. Not the shove. Not even the word specifically. The problem is that you looked at this woman and did not consider that she might have a reason to be there. You skipped that step entirely. Colt stood very still. Maya, at that exact hour, was in the supply room 3 buildings over, running a Wednesday inventory check that needed to happen regardless of what was or was not occurring in anyone's office. She had a system for this, a physical walkthrough combined with a cross-reference against the digital records, because in her experience, digital records and physical reality diverged in ways that mattered, and the only way to catch the divergence was to use your eyes. She was counting industrial-sized containers of a rice variety when Terry appeared in the doorway. They called him in, Terry said. Maya did not stop counting. How do you know? Because Vega walked through the hall with his I have been given instructions face on, and 20 minutes later Colt walked past the kitchen going the direction of command offices. Terry's intelligence network on this base was, by any reasonable assessment, more comprehensive than anything official. 11 years had given her a topographical map of the base's social geography that no org chart could replicate. That was fast, Maya said. Your email was well written. I know. She finished counting the rice. Made her note. Moved to the next shelf. Terry leaned against the doorframe. She was quiet for a moment in the way she got quiet when she was deciding whether to say something. You know what comes next might be uncomfortable, she said. I know. They might come and ask you things. Want to clarify. Might bring in people who are nearby. Ask them what they saw, and some of those people might suddenly have a bad memory. I know that too. I just want to make sure you're Terry. Maya, turn around. I have been navigating institutions that would rather I had a bad memory for my entire adult life. I'm not going in expecting it to be easy. I'm going in with documentation and witness names and a very clear account of what happened, and whatever they do with that is on them. My job is to give them no room to call it unclear. Terry looked at her for a long moment. Okay, she said. Okay, Maya said. She turned back to the shelf. Counted. The meeting in Mayhew's office lasted 40 minutes. This was notable. Most command conversations of this type ran 15, 20 at the outside. 40 minutes meant something was being worked through rather than simply processed. Afterward, Colt stood in the hallway outside. He did not move immediately. He held the posture of a man who has been somewhere that shifted something in him, and who has not yet integrated the shift enough to walk normally. He was not in trouble, technically. There would be no formal disciplinary action on the basis of a single incident. The complaint would be noted. It was already noted. It would exist in the file as noted things exist. Mayhew was too experienced to over-escalate something that was not, in legal or regulatory terms, a severe infraction. He was also too experienced to let it pass, as though it had not happened. What Mayhew had told him at the end of 40 minutes was this: you're going to go introduce yourself to Maya Reeves. Not to apologize in a way that makes this about your feelings. To introduce yourself. Name, role, acknowledgement that you're aware of what she does and that it matters. That's it. You're going to do that today. Colt had nodded. He stood in the hallway now and tried to figure out how a person who has never thought about a thing starts thinking about it. The honest answer was not easily. Not in a straight line. Not in a way that felt clean or resolved. He thought about the over-the-shoulder glance. He had not replayed it since Tuesday. It had not seemed worth replaying. Now he replayed it. Tried to see it from a different angle. From her angle, he had looked at a person and, in the look, communicated, "You are not worth stopping for." He had not meant to communicate that. He had not consciously thought it. It had communicated itself through the look anyway, the way things do when they live below the level of conscious thought, automatic, unexamined, invisible to the person doing them until someone forces the light on. Mayhew had forced the light on. Colt stood in the hallway and let himself feel what it was like to stand in it. He found her at 1400, not by surveillance. He went to the supply coordinator's office and asked where Maya Reeves was currently working, and the coordinator told him the walk-in storage area in Building 7. He said thank you. He walked to Building 7. She was still doing inventory, or back to it. She had the methodical movement of someone for whom a task is also a way of thinking, the clipboard and the counting, a kind of motion-based processing. She heard him before she saw him. Footsteps with a specific weight and cadence. She had learned, in 14 months, the acoustic vocabulary of the bass the way you learn any language spoken around you constantly. She did not turn around immediately. "Ms. Reeves," he said. She turned. He looked different, standing still and facing her directly, than he had looked in motion. The size was the same. The uniform was the same. What was different was the quality of his attention. He was actually looking at her, the way you look at a person as opposed to the way you look at furniture or an obstacle. She waited. "My name is Staff Sergeant Daniel Colt," he said. "I understand you know that already." I wanted to. He paused. He was being careful about the words, visibly, in a way that was either practiced or effortful or both. "I wanted to introduce myself properly. I'm aware of the work you do. Supply logistics for the unit. I wasn't. I should have been aware of it sooner." Maya held her clipboard against her chest. She had the expression of someone running a very precise internal process, evaluating not just the words but the architecture behind them, whether this was sent or chosen, whether it was form or substance. "You were told to come here," she said. It was not a question. He could have denied it. He did not. "Yes," he said, "but that doesn't make it. I'm not here only because I was told to. Why else?" He looked at the middle distance for a half second, long enough for her to see that he was not reaching for a pre-written answer, but for an actual one. "Because I looked at you and did not see you," he said, "and I should have." The storage room was cold. The fluorescent lights ran in that slightly irregular flicker that fluorescent lights in industrial spaces always seem to have, steady enough to not be distracting, inconsistent enough that you notice it if you're paying attention. Maya was paying attention to a lot of things at once. "That's a more honest answer than I expected," she said. "I don't know how to give a less honest one without it being obvious. Most people manage." "I know." She looked at him. He did not look away. "What you said," she said, "telling me to leave. Do you understand why that was? Specifically why? Because you weren't in the wrong place," he said. "I assumed you were without checking because," he stopped. "Because of what I assumed when I saw you." He did not name the assumption. She did not ask him to, because they both knew what it was, and naming it in a storage room in Building 7 was not going to resolve it or make it smaller. 14 months, she said. "I've been managing supply logistics for your unit for 14 months. I know that now. You ate food that got there because of work I did." "Yes." "And yesterday you looked at me and saw someone who should leave." "Yes." She held his gaze. He held hers. The fluorescent lights flickered once, irregularly, and went back to their approximation of steady. "I'm going to be here tomorrow," she said, "and the day after. I'm not leaving because you told me to, and I'm not leaving because this was uncomfortable. I do my job. That's what I do. I understand. Good, she said. She turned back to her inventory. I'll accept the introduction, Sergeant. I don't accept it as a resolution. I didn't offer it as one. She was already writing something on her clipboard. Her handwriting, even in the cold, was precise and legible. The kind of handwriting that belongs to someone who takes seriously the idea that written things should be readable. He stood there for a moment, not awkwardly, but not quite ready to leave, and then he said, "The coffee urns. In the fall. That was you." She paused her writing. "Yes." He nodded once. Then he left. What happened after that was not immediate. This is important to understand. Institutional change, when it happens at all, does not happen in a single conversation. It is not resolved cleanly in an afternoon. The thing that shifts is not a policy or a procedure, at least not right away. The thing that shifts first is smaller. A man begins to see a gap between what he thought he was doing and what he was actually doing. That gap is uncomfortable. Productive discomfort is still discomfort. Colt was not the kind of person who processed things quickly through conversation. He processed through action, through the physical, and structured through the military habit of converting internal state into external behavior. That night, he ran 6 miles on the base track, which was 2 more miles than his usual. Not punishment, more like he was trying to outpace something that had settled into his chest and needed somewhere to go. He thought about his mother in Pensacola. He thought about the stories she had told him, not the ones she told on purpose, but the ones that came out sideways in the middle of other things. About the job she'd had in her 40s, in a hospital administrator's office, where she had done work that advanced her supervisor's career without her name ever appearing on the results. About the promotions she'd watched go to people who did less. About how she had been, for most of her professional life, exceptionally good at making herself invisible when visibility would have made her a target, and at the same time furious at how well she'd had to learn to do it. He had heard those stories. He had understood them as her stories. About her time and her industry and the specific circumstances of her life. He had not, until today, understood them as a pattern he himself participated in perpetuating. He ran the 6th mile and walked the last quarter of it cooling down, hands on his hips, breathing through the cold evening air. That was the first time in his life that particular understanding arrived. Not through argument or accusation, though those had both happened, in Mayhew's office, but through the image of his mother's face while telling a story he had filed under her experience instead of the world structure. He was 32 years old. He had thought of himself as a fair man. He was starting to understand that thinking of yourself as a fair man and being one required different things than he had previously assumed. Maya called her mother that evening. They had a ritual, Wednesday evening calls, approximately 45 minutes, a structured conversation that covered everything from logistics to philosophy and never felt long enough. Her mother, Denise, was 61 years old and had the specific wisdom of someone who has been patient in the face of many things that did not deserve patience, and has chosen to be, anyway, because the alternative was to let those things make her smaller. Maya told her what had happened, precisely in the same way she documented things, not dramatically, but completely. Denise listened without interrupting. This was one of the things Maya most valued about her mother. The listening was real. Not polite, waiting for a turn. Actualisception. When Maya finished, Denise said, "How are you? Now what do you think? Now what happens next? How are you?" "I'm fine," Maya said. Then, "I'm tired. But the kind of tired that comes from doing the thing rather than not doing it, so it's the better kind." "Did you feel heard?" "By Mayhew's process, yes." By Colt, she paused. "He came himself. He said something honest." "What did he say?" "He said he looked at me and didn't see me." A pause on the other end of the line. "That's more than most people manage," Denise said. "I know. Does it resolve it?" "No," Maya said. "It's not supposed to resolve it. One conversation doesn't resolve a thing. It opens a door, maybe, and then it's up to whoever's on both sides of it to walk through." "And will you?" Maya thought about this. Outside her window, the base was doing its evening rhythm. Lights coming on, the shift change sounds, the particular quiet that comes after the day's operational noise settles. "I'll keep doing my job," she said. "Extraordinarily well. That's always been my answer." "But yes. If the door's there, yes." "That's my daughter," Denise said. And there was in those 3 words everything that 14 months of invisible work and one Tuesday in a mess hall could not touch. The knowledge of being known entirely by someone who chooses to know you. Maya sat with that for a moment. Then, she asked about her mother's garden, because Denise was in the middle of a particularly difficult situation with a rose variety that had not cooperated through the last season, and this was equally real and equally worth talking about. The conversation ran 50 minutes instead of 45. It was enough. 3 weeks after the mess hall, there was a supply crisis. Not the kind with dramatic warning signs, not a single catastrophic failure, nothing cinematic. The kind that arrives quietly through accumulation. A vendor contract that had been sliding toward non-renewal for 6 months finally terminated. A secondary supplier with a delivery delay that stretched from 2 days to 10. A refrigeration unit in storage that had been running 3 degrees warmer than logged, which nobody noticed until the notation on Maya's inventory crosscheck flagged it, and she recalculated the spoilage projections forward and realized that in 8 days, the base was going to have a significant gap in its protein supply during a period when 400 personnel were in an intensified training cycle. She caught on a Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, she had a contingency plan with 3 alternative supplier options, cost comparison attached, lead times estimated, the refrigeration unit issue routed to maintenance with documentation of when it had started running warm and what that meant for current stock levels. She sent it up the chain in a memo. Captain Mayhew read it on Friday morning, forwarded it internally with a note. Civilian contractor Maya Reeves has identified and preempted a supply gap that would have affected training operations. Please see attached for her proposed resolution. I recommend we move on option 2. Option 2 was implemented by Friday afternoon. There was no crisis. There was no gap. Training operations ran without interruption. Approximately 0 people on the base knew that this had happened, because the definition of a crisis averted is that it never becomes visible as a crisis. It becomes invisible. It becomes, nothing went wrong this week. And nothing going wrong is the condition that everyone assumes is the baseline without wondering how much work goes into maintaining it. Colt knew, because Mayhew had made a decision, the kind that comes from 40 minutes of conversation and, however, many hours of follow-through, to change something about how he ran his unit's awareness of its own operational support structure. It was a small change. He added a standing item to the Monday morning briefing. Supply status, sourced directly from Maya's weekly inventory reports, attributed by name. Maya Reeves's report indicates our protein supply is stable through the end of the month. She flagged a refrigeration issue last week that's been addressed. No anticipatis shortfalls. It took approximately 45 seconds to say. It added exactly 1 line of attribution to a briefing that ran 25 minutes. The Marines present noted it the way you note the sound of a car engine when it's running correctly. It registered, and then the briefing moved on. Except for Colt, who heard his name spoken in a context that made it a professional identity rather than an incident to be managed. Who heard the work he had not known existed described as something operational, something that connected directly to his unit's capacity to do its job. He thought about the storage room in Building 7, the fluorescent lights, her clipboard, the way she had said, "You ate food that got there because of work I did." He had understood the words when she said them. He was understanding them differently now, in a briefing room, in the context of a supply crisis that had not happened because of 14 months of work he had never thought to wonder about. There is a difference between understanding a thing intellectually and feeling the full weight of it. The weight is heavier. He went back to Building 7 on a Tuesday. Not because he was sent. He went on his own, before lunch, off his usual route, making a deliberate detour that took 12 minutes he did not have to spare. Maya was at her workstation, which was a desk in a small office adjacent to the main storage area. Not a prestigious desk. Fluorescent lights again, a window that looked out at a concrete wall, stacks of binders color-coded in a system that was clearly hers rather than any officially mandated system. The office had the particular quality of a space that has been made functional by someone who knows function is more important than appearance, and has acted on that knowledge without ceremony. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway. "Sergeant," she said. Not warmly, not coldly either. The tone of someone who has put a thing in its correct category and is prepared to interact with it accordingly. "I wanted to ask you something," he said, "if you have a few minutes." She looked at him for a moment. Then she gestured toward the chair across from her desk, a folding chair, the institutional kind, the kind that communicates. There was a budget meeting, and This is what it concluded. He sat. The refrigeration unit, he said. Last week. I heard about it in briefing. You caught how? She looked at him with the expression of someone recalibrating a conversation she had prepared for in one direction and is now being asked to go a different one. Cross-referencing physical inventory against the digital records, she said. The unit's internal sensor log said it was running at standard temperature. My walkthrough said the product on the lower shelves was showing early-stage variance from expected condition. I pulled the sensor calibration history. The sensor had been miscalibrated for 11 weeks. The sensor was wrong, and the physical check caught it. The physical check caught what the automated system missed. Yes. How often do you do physical walkthroughs? Every Wednesday. But I also do spot checks on days when something in the digital record looks off. The digital record looked off 3 weeks ago. Nothing definitive, just a slight inconsistency in one product line's condition reports. I flagged it to myself mentally and started paying closer attention to that storage section. He was quiet for a moment. Processing. You were watching for it for 3 weeks before you found the source. Yes. And flagged it before it became operational. That's the job, she said. He looked at the binders on her shelf. The color-coded system. He looked at the window that faced the concrete wall and thought about what it said about a person that they had built a meticulous organizational system in a room with no view and a fluorescent light that flickered. Why do you do it that way? He asked. The physical checks. You could, given the amount of automated tracking, you could do this job from a computer. She picked up her pen, turned it once precisely in her hand. Because systems fail, she said. Every system fails eventually, and when they fail in the direction of what they were designed to see. The only thing that catches what a system isn't designed to see is a person who is actually looking. He sat with that. I've been in the field, he said. 2 deployments. That's the same thing we learn about tactical assessment. You can't trust only the instruments. Someone has to look. Yes, she said. Simply. And you've been the person looking. For 14 months. He nodded. He was doing something with his jaw. Not clenching it, but holding it in a way that suggested he was working through something that was not quick to work through. I owe you more than an introduction, he said. She looked at him directly. I know. What would? He stopped. Started differently. What do you need? Not from me personally. What does this work need that it isn't getting? That was not the question she had expected. She studied him for a long moment, looking for the performance of it, for the hollow version, the I am being seen to make amends version. She was very good at reading the difference. She had had a lot of practice. She did not find it. Better sensor calibration schedules, she said. The current protocol is annual. It should be quarterly. I've put that in 3 separate reports over 14 months. Nothing happened. The reports went where reports go. He looked at her steadily. I can put it in front of Mayhew. With a practical argument. Not a complaint, a tactical one. If a miscalibrated sensor can create an operational gap, and the current calibration schedule allows that kind of drift to go undetected for 11 weeks, the schedule is inadequate. That's a maintenance and readiness argument, not a contractor request. She turned her pen again. That's a smarter angle than the one I've been using, she said. You were using the correct angle for what it was. I'm using a different angle because of who I am. That's a frustrating reality. Yes, he said. It is. She looked at the concrete wall through the window for a moment. Then, she looked back at him. Quarterly calibration checks, she said, and a formal review of the cross-referencing protocol, so the physical check isn't dependent on one person's availability. If I'm out sick or leave, the system needs to be documented well enough that the next person can do what I do. Because right now, it's in your head. Because right now, it's in my head. He stood. He straightened his uniform. Not out of nerves, just the particular physical habit of a Marine transitioning between a sitting posture and a standing one. I'll talk to Mayhew, he said. She nodded. Once. He left. She sat for a moment in the office with the fluorescent light and the concrete view, and she thought about the nature of what had just happened. It was not a resolution. It was not even a pivot, exactly. More like a first slow movement in a direction that might or might not end up being the right one. She had been careful with her expectations. She continued to be careful. But he had asked what the work needed. He had not asked what she needed him to feel. That was different. The calibration protocol came up in the following week's operational review. Mayhew, who had been given the argument in the form Colt had prepared, tactical, readiness-focused, numbers attached, passed it to the maintenance coordination office with a recommendation for immediate scheduling adjustment. The new protocol was in place within 3 weeks. The quarterly calibration schedule became standard. Nobody announced it as a victory or named it as a result of anything. It became simply the new way things were done. Institutional memory, when it works, absorbs changes without ceremony, without headline, without the dramatic acknowledgement of what drove the change. Maya found out through the maintenance calendar. She was doing a Wednesday walkthrough, and the maintenance team was in the storage room, running the first quarterly calibration check. She stood at the door for a moment and watched them work. New schedule, one of the technicians said, by way of explanation. I know, Maya said. She went back to her inventory. What happened next was not one thing. This is important to understand about real change as opposed to the narrative version of it. Real change is granular. It is made of small adjustments that individually seem minor and collectively become something different. Mayhew's Monday attribution practice spread, not because he mandated it to others, but because habits in a functional command structure propagate through modeling. His first sergeant started including Maya's reports by name in his own weekly communications. The maintenance coordinator began copying her on repair tickets that related to storage systems, rather than simply completing the work and filing it without her knowing. She became, gradually and without fanfare, visible in the institutional sense. Not celebrated. She was not looking for celebration, but named, known, connected in the organizational map of the base to the work she was actually doing. This sounds like a small thing. It is not a small thing. The difference between invisible work and named work is the difference between a system that can only function when a specific person is in the room and a system that understands what it depends on and protects that dependency. One is fragile. The other is not. Maya understood this better than most people because she had studied, throughout her career, the ways institutional fragility masquerades as efficiency. The assumption that a thing will keep working without anyone asking how. That is not efficiency. That is borrowed time. Colt, over the following months, did what people rarely do and almost never do completely. He changed. Not in the dramatic, narrative-friendly way. Not with a single revelation that reconfigured everything. He changed the way someone rebuilds a piece of equipment after understanding how it actually works. Piece by piece, with attention, with a willingness to take apart assumptions he had never examined because they had never needed examination before. He started noticing things he had not noticed. The civilian contractors who maintained the systems he used without thinking. The administrative staff who managed the paperwork that made his operational authority possible. The people who cleaned the spaces he worked in, whose presence he had processed as background, and whose names he did not know. He started learning names. Not as a project. Not with the self-conscious effort of someone performing a value they're trying to adopt, but in the ordinary way of someone who has decided that the person in front of them is worth looking at. He was not always good at this. He was a work in progress. He would catch himself mid-assumption and have to back up, which was not a comfortable feeling. He would sometimes err in the other direction, overcorrect, make something performatively careful that would have been better handled with the ordinary directness he was actually good at. He talked about this with a brew once, late in the evening after a training day that had run long. A brew who had been at the lunch table on the Tuesday in question and had said nothing and had been thinking about that intermittently ever since. You think about it as a skill, a brew said. Like anything else. You're bad at it at first. You get less bad. When did you start? Colt paused. How did you get better at it? A brew looked at him. My mother, he said. She worked in hospital food services for 20 years. The way people talked about her work, but didn't talk about it. He was quiet for a moment. I thought about it a lot after Tuesday, because I was sitting right there. You didn't say anything. No, why? A brew turned his water bottle in his hands. Because it's easier not to, because the moment moves fast, and you tell yourself it's not your thing to get into. And then the moment's gone, and you spent the next few days thinking about your mother in a hospital cafeteria. Neither of them said anything for a moment. If it happened again, Colt said, and I'm not there. I know, a brew said. I know. Maya, around month 4 after the mess hall Tuesday, had a conversation with her supervisor Mark Halstead that she had been building toward for some time. She asked for a formal job description review, not a raise, though the raise was warranted and she knew it. The job description. the document that defined officially what her role was and what her responsibilities included. She had looked at the current document recently, for the first time since she was hired, and the gap between what the document said and what she actually did had made her want to push the document through a shredder at a meaningful velocity. The document described a logistics support role. What she actually did was predictive supply management, system monitoring, contingency planning, contractor relationship management, cross-departmental communication, and the kind of institutionally embedded pattern recognition that the refrigeration sensor catch represented. The document described a part of this. She did the rest anyway because it needed doing. "I'm not doing the job that's written down," she told Halstead. "I'm doing a more complex and more valuable version of it that needs to be reflected in my title, my classification, and my compensation." Halstead was a man who preferred when things were uncomplicated. Maya had never been uncomplicated, but she had been careful enough about when she deployed complexity that he had managed to mostly work around it. She was not being careful now. "I'll need to take it up the chain," he said. "I have documentation," she said, "of what the role actually includes. Specific instances. The refrigeration catch is in there. The winter supplier alternatives. The earned positioning in the fall. 14 months of documented contribution." She slid the folder across his desk. He opened it. He read the first page. She watched his eyes move. The folder was 47 pages. She had been building it for 14 months without knowing exactly when she would use it. She had built it because she was Maya Reeves, and she understood, at a foundational level, that invisible work needs to be made visible by the person doing it if no one else will do the making. "This is comprehensive," Halstead said. "Yes," she said. "It is." He looked at her. He looked at the folder. "I'll bring it forward," he said. "I'll need a few weeks." "Take the time you need," she said. "I'll be here." She would be here. She had always been here. She would continue to be here, doing the work at the standard she had always held herself to, regardless of how long the process took or what it concluded. The work was not conditional on the process, but the process was now underway. She walked out of Halstead's office and through the hallway that led back toward the supply area, through the base that she knew the way you know a thing you have paid close attention to for a long time, and she thought about what it cost to be precise in a world that does not always reward precision, and whether it was worth it, and she arrived at the answer she always arrived at. Yes, because the alternative is to become imprecise, and she would not do that. She would not let a Tuesday in a mess hall, or a decade of ignored reports, or a concrete wall office, or any of it chip away at the quality of what she did, because the quality was hers. It did not belong to the institution. It did not depend on their recognition. The recognition was what she was pursuing methodically, patiently, with 47 pages of documentation, because she had earned it. But the quality had always been hers. Outside the supply area, the base hummed with its ordinary motion. Personnel moving between buildings. Equipment running. The low, continuous machinery of a place that depends on 1,000 invisible systems to function, most of which work correctly because someone, somewhere, is paying close attention. She pushed open the door to her office. The fluorescent light was steady today, not flickering. She sat down. She picked up her pen. She started her Thursday notes.